Marcus Reid knew every inch of that building. He knew which floor tiles creaked, which elevators stuck between the third and fourth floor, which corner office got the best morning light. He knew because he built it. Not with steel and concrete, but with sleepless nights, unpaid overtime, and a dream nobody believed in except him. 11 years ago, Marcus and Diane started with nothing but a laptop, a garage, and a stubborn belief that they could build something real. Marcus remembers walking into 3 different banks that year, dressed sharp, numbers memorized, business plan tight as a drum. And 3 different loan officers looked at him, looked at his zip code on the application, and found a polite way to say no. Diane got approved on her second try. Nobody asked her the same questions they asked him. He never let that bitterness win. He told himself it didn't matter who got the paperwork signed, as long as they built it together. So he worked. He worked nights while Diane slept. He worked through birthdays, through his own father's funeral, through years where he barely recognized his own reflection. Every late contract, every product launch, every crisis that could have sunk them, Marcus was the one who held it together. People used to call him the heart of the company. He believed them. But somewhere along the way, the story changed. Diane started standing at the front of the room. Diane started taking the meetings with investors alone. Diane started saying I when she used to say we. Marcus told himself it was just optics, just business, just the way these things work. He didn't want to believe what his gut was already telling him. Then came the morning he got the calendar invite. Boardroom, 9 a.m., no agenda listed. He walked in wearing the same blue suit he wore the day they signed their first client, thinking maybe this was good news. Maybe this was finally the recognition 11 years had been building toward. It wasn't. Diane sat at the head of the table, not beside him, at the head. Around her sat the board men who once shook his hand like he was family. Men who used to call him at midnight when something broke because they trusted no one else to fix it. Nobody looked him in the eye. Diane didn't waste words. She said the company was moving in a new direction. She said his role was being eliminated, effective immediately. She said it the way you'd read a weather report. No shake in her voice, no hesitation. Marcus asked if this was a joke. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. He looked around that room, at every white face that had once called him irreplaceable, and understood, in that single silent moment, exactly what he had become to them. Convenient, disposable, a name easy to erase once it stopped being useful. Security walked him to his office, not because he was dangerous, because that's the procedure. He watched a stranger hand him a cardboard box for his own belongings. In the building, his own hands had helped wire, paint, and build from an empty shell into something people were proud to work in. 3 days later, the divorce papers arrived. Diane didn't call. She didn't explain. She let a lawyer's letter do what she couldn't say to his face. Marcus stood in the parking lot that final afternoon, box in his arms, sun beating down like it didn't know the world had just ended. He looked up at the building one last time, his name nowhere on it, though his blood, sweat, and years were poured into every wall. And for the first time in 11 years, Marcus Reid didn't know who he was anymore. He just knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus didn't go home that night. He drove to a storage unit on the edge of town, a place he hadn't visited in years, and sat in his car in the dark for almost an hour before he could bring himself to go inside. Sometimes the mind needs quiet before it can face the truth. And that night, sitting alone in a parking lot with nothing but a cardboard box and 11 years of his life folded into it, Marcus finally let himself remember. He grew up in a small house with thin walls, where his mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and his father drove a delivery truck for a company that never once gave him the promotion he'd earned 3 separate times. Marcus remembers his father coming home quiet on those nights. No shouting, no complaining, just a tired kind of silence that Marcus didn't understand until he was much older. His father used to say, "Work hard, keep your head down, and one day they'll have to notice you." Marcus believed him. For years, he believed him. Growing up, teachers assumed things about him before he ever opened his mouth. Assumed he wouldn't finish his homework. Assumed he'd end up like the boys on the corner instead of the boy with straight A's who read encyclopedias for fun. He learned early that being twice as good only earned him half the credit. He learned to smile through it, to let his work speak so loud that no one could ignore it. That's the lesson his father passed down without ever meaning to. Don't complain, don't make noise, just outwork the doubt until it disappears. So, when he met Diane in college, sharp, ambitious, hungry in the same way he was, he thought he'd finally found someone who saw him the way he saw himself. Someone who didn't need convincing. They built the company on that trust. And that trust is exactly what cost him everything. Marcus never once asked for his name on the patents. Diane always said it didn't matter, that they were partners, that everything they built belonged to both of them equally, married and merged. No separating one from the other. He believed her. He signed what she put in front of him without reading every line, because that's what you do with someone you love. He let his name fade quietly off contracts, off filings, off the very ideas he stayed up nights perfecting, because arguing over paperwork felt petty next to what he thought they had. It wasn't until sitting in that dark car outside a storage unit that Marcus understood the full weight of what he'd done. He hadn't just trusted his wife. He'd trusted the same broken promise his father trusted his entire life, the promise that hard work alone would be enough, that the system would eventually notice and reward him fairly. It never had. Not for his father. And now, not for him either. He stepped out of the car and unlocked the storage unit, flipping on a single bulb that buzzed and flickered before settling into a dim yellow glow. Boxes he hadn't touched in years lined the walls, remnants from the early days of the company, back when it was just him and Diane and a folding table in a garage. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a piece of himself he was afraid he'd lost. Then he found it. A worn folder, tucked behind old tax records, labelled in his own handwriting from a decade ago. Early drafts. Original designs. Notes and sketches with dates that predated every patent filed under the company's name dates that proved, in ink he could never deny, exactly who built what and when. Marcus sat down on a cold concrete floor holding that folder like it was the only solid thing left in his world. For the first time since the boardroom, since the papers, since the box in the parking lot, something inside him shifted. Not rage yet. Not even hope. Just the quiet, dangerous beginning of a man remembering exactly who he was. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the folder spread open in front of him, papers organized by date, each one a piece of a story nobody in that boardroom thought he had the power to tell. Somewhere around 3 a.m, he picked up his phone and called the only person left who might actually believe him. Renee picked up on the second ring. Her voice was groggy, confused until she heard who it was. Marcus didn't waste time apologizing for the hour. He asked her one question. Do you still have access to the internal legal drive? Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, she said yes. Renee had been his assistant for 6 years. She'd watched everything happen in real time. She'd seen the way meetings shifted once Diane started taking the lead, the way credit moved without explanation, the way Marcus's name slowly disappeared from documents he used to be listed on first. She never said anything. She had 2 kids and a mortgage and a healthy fear of what happens to people who speak up in rooms built to protect the people at the top. But she noticed. She always noticed. Marcus told her everything. The folder, the dates. The original patents filed years before the company ever registered them under different names. He told her this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, finally having somewhere to land. And then he asked her to do one thing. Pull every filing, every signature, every board resolution from the last 5 years. Quietly, carefully, and send them to the lawyer he was about to hire. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of quiet phone calls, of lawyers combing through paperwork nobody thought anyone would ever read again. Of Renee working late nights just like the old days, except this time she wasn't protecting the people at the top. She was helping take the truth back. The findings were undeniable. Marcus held the original intellectual property behind 4 of the company's most profitable products, filed under his name years before Diane's team quietly refiled them under corporate ownership without his signature. Contracts had been altered. Approvals had been backdated. It wasn't just unethical. It was the kind of legal exposure that could unravel a publicly respected company overnight. Marcus requested an emergency board meeting, not as an employee, as a legal claimant with documentation that could not be argued with. He walked into that same boardroom 3 weeks after being escorted out of it. Same table, same chairs, same faces, though this time none of them looked comfortable. Diane sat at the head of the table again, but her hands were folded a little too tightly. Her jaw set in a way Marcus recognized from every difficult negotiation they'd ever been through together. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and let the silence do what silence always does in a room full of people who know they've been caught. Every board member reviewed the documents themselves. Every lawyer in the room went pale at the same moment. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Marcus said the words he never thought he'd have the power to say. Effective immediately, I'm requesting a full board vote to reclaim ownership of the intellectual property filed under my name, and I want every executive who signed off on falsified documentation removed from this company. He looked directly at Renee, who sat quietly in the corner with a laptop open, ready, fire every one of them. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was said the way truth is said when it no longer needs permission to exist. The vote didn't take long. Faced with legal exposure severe enough to end the company entirely, the board had no real choice. One by one, the executives who built careers standing on Marcus's uncredited work were removed. Diane sat frozen through all of it, watching the empire she thought she controlled dissolve into the hands of the one person she assumed would never fight back. For the first time in 11 years, Marcus Reid didn't have to prove his worth to anyone in that room. The paperwork already had. 6 months passed before Marcus walked back into that building as its rightful owner. He didn't celebrate. He didn't throw a party or make a speech about triumph. He simply sat down in the same office he'd been escorted out of, looked around at walls he helped build with his own hands, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. He could have become exactly what broke him. He had the power now to fire without warning, to erase people the way he'd been erased, to run that company with the same cold detachment that once treated him like a number on a payroll instead of the man who built its foundation. But Marcus remembered his father's tired silence too well. He remembered every meeting where his ideas were spoken back to him in someone else's voice, credited to someone else's name. He didn't want to build a legacy on the same erasure that almost buried him. So he did something different. He brought back every employee who'd shown him loyalty during the years nobody was watching, promoting people who actually understood what it meant to be overlooked and underestimated. He restructured how credit was given, made sure every patent, every project, every late night of work was documented and attributed properly, so no one after him would ever have to fight to prove what was rightfully theirs. Reid became Vice President of Operations. It wasn't a reward. It was recognition, finally given to someone who earned it in silence for years. Diane didn't disappear quietly. She fought the ruling in court for months, spent what savings she had left trying to hold on to a title that no longer meant what it used to. But paperwork doesn't bend to pride, and truth, once it's documented, doesn't change no matter how loud someone argues against it. In the end, she walked away with far less than she started with, and a lesson she never expected to learn this late in life. Loyalty built on convenience always collapses the moment convenience runs out. Marcus saw her once more, months later, at a mutual friends' gathering neither expected the other to attend. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way people look when the version of themselves they built collapses and leaves something more honest standing in its place. She didn't apologize. Marcus didn't expect her to. Some people spend their whole lives protecting their pride instead of their conscience, and he'd made peace with the fact that her reckoning was hers to carry, not his to fix. What mattered now was what he built after. Marcus understood something his father never got the chance to learn. Being twice as good was never the problem. The problem was believing the system would notice fairness on its own, without someone forcing the truth into the light. He didn't get justice by staying quiet and hoping. He got it by refusing to let his own story be written by people who never valued him in the first place. Dignity, Marcus learned, doesn't come from being loud. It comes from refusing to disappear, even when everyone around you decides you already have. Betrayal can take your title, your marriage, your name off a building you built with your own hands. But it can't take the truth. And eventually, truth finds its way back to the person who never stopped holding on to it. This has been a story from Simmons, and this is Chronicles of Black. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest, and if you believe justice always finds its way back to those who deserve it. Make sure you subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting to be told. Stories about strength, about silence finally breaking, and about people who refuse to let the world erase who they really are.